Okay, welcome back. So today we're going through October-November 2023 question paper 12. I'm going to start at the bottom. Okay, so difficult question, this one. Government reduces the rate of tax firms are charged on their land and their buildings. Okay. Now, one thing we need to take account of here is straight away we might assume that that's going to be an expansionary fiscal policy, right? But remember that the expansionary fiscal policy which affects AD is relating to corporation tax, and that's the tax that they're charged on their profits, which will actually increase their ability to invest, which may be a reason for that component of aggregate demand moving to the right. However, if we reduce the rate of tax that they're charged on their land and buildings, what that's going to do is it's actually going to increase or incentivize the aggregate supply to increase, right? So the supply of land and buildings may therefore increase, or else the amount that we can produce may therefore increase because we're paying less tax on them. So all we have to do once we identify the direction of the shift is we have to see what is going to happen with our aggregate demand and our aggregate supply curve. Okay, so if we have AD and if we have AS, we'll have our initial price level here and our initial level of real GDP, or initial level of output. And then when AS moves to the right, due to the reduction in the tax on the land and the buildings, we can see that what happens is we create what we know from our study is called good deflation, which is where the price level goes down, but we're actually able to increase our levels of real GDP. So real GDP moves right, which means that our output will rise, and price level moves down, which means that we have deflation, or it will fall. So we can see that our correct answer will be B. 29. A government wants to reduce inflation. Okay, so they want to bring the price level down. It is decided to cut government spending by 1 billion. So what's that going to do? That's going to be a contractionary fiscal policy which will be designed to move AD to the left, right? Which is good because we know that that's one of the ways that we can decrease inflation. Diagram shows different starting positions for the country's aggregate demand curve. Which starting position would make this policy least effective? Okay, so this is pretty simple. The policy that's going to make it least effective is the one that is the closest here to the left hand side, basically, because when we have a lot of spare capacity here, if we have a shift in AD, what we'd be doing is we'd be barely, if even at all, bringing down the price level, but we will be decreasing the output, right? So therefore the starting position that would be least likely to make the policy effective is if we have a load of spare capacity. The less spare capacity we have as we go up here, if we just take these points across, we can see that all of these points would result in quite a significant decrease in the price level, okay, which would be, remember, our inflation is linked to our price level, so that would reduce the inflation. Whereas here, if we bring these points across with our imaginary shift, I know that my lines are terrible, but you can see in the curve there would be barely any change in price level, if even at all. Okay, very straightforward. And 28 is pretty straightforward too. So a foreign government pays a UK university to educate its students. How would this be recorded on the balance of payments, BOP, current account of the UK? Okay. So a foreign government is paying a UK university to educate its students. That would be tertiary education, right? And tertiary education is a service that is provided. When you go to university, that's the service sector is what a university is in. So it's not recorded as secondary income. It's nothing to do with workers' remittances. It's nothing to do with gifts or international aid payments, etc. It's to do with the transaction of a service that the foreign government is paying this UK university for. Okay? Now all we have to do is we have to decide, is it an inflow or an outflow? And it's very simple. Who's receiving the money? The UK is receiving the money, so it is going to be an inflow recorded as a credit item on the UK current account balance of payments. Outflow would be if the money is going out. It'd be recorded as an outflow for the foreign government on their current account balance of payments. But because we're told for the UK, they're the ones who are receiving the funds, so it's an inflow for them. Okay, 27 is also very simple. Which tax may a government use to reduce inequality? That would be a progressive income tax. All of the others will not reduce inequality. Our proportionate income tax is where everybody pays the same percentage irregardless of their income. So in order to have a reduction in inequality, we want to put more money in the poor people's pockets and take more money out of the rich people's pockets, which is exactly what a progressive tax will do. Because as they start to earn more money, so the higher income earners, they will pay a higher percentage of tax on their income. And the lower income earners will pay a smaller percentage of tax on their income. So therefore, a proportionate indirect tax will also not have an effect on reducing inequality. The same thing, that's just going to be a specific percentage is paid on a good or a service, and then specific indirect tax is the same. That's just a tax that is placed on a good or a service that is not going to allow poor people to have more money. Okay. Which supply side measure is most likely to produce short-run growth in a country's aggregate supply? Okay, another very simple question. I think this is actually a relatively easy paper compared to QP11. So that would be the easing of controls on the immigration of workers, because as soon as we ease those controls, we can immediately have an influx of the immigrants into our country, which can allow us to move our aggregate supply to the right through an increase in the quantity of labour that is available. Whereas expenditure on primary education will be a long run effect. Okay, it's going to take, if we increase the quality of our education, think about it logically. If we increase the quality of our education right now, it's going to take 20 years before those people who are benefiting from that increased education are actually entering into the workforce. The same with research and development. That's a long run effect, because what that is going to do is that is going to allow us to innovate and develop new products, but that takes a lot of time. The research and development can take years to take effect. And privatization of public utilities is quite an odd one to bring up, really. So those public utilities, we're talking about electricity or water, etc. If we make those companies private, that's not really going to affect the aggregate supply. Privatization is a supply side policy, but we're talking about privatization of industries, like, for example, if we privatize the train industry, for example, like what has happened in the UK. So 25, a country's current account deficit is larger this year than last. What is the most likely reason for this increase? So current account deficit is larger this year than last. So what we can assume, even though we know there's other components, is we can assume that imports are up and exports are down. Okay, so which one of these reasons is the most likely reason? So there is other reasons in here that might result in this increase. So let's go to the ones that aren't first. So if the exchange rate depreciates, we would have exports increasing and imports decreasing. So that is definitely not correct. When we talk about the demand for domestically produced goods has risen. So what may happen is, we know that our resources are limited, right? So it may be possible that if our domestic demand rises, the people who are exporting these goods and services may actually switch from exporting to selling their goods domestically. But there is also a likelihood that when the domestically produced goods, the demand for them rises, that we may be able to actually also simultaneously increase the number of exports that we send to other countries. Okay, so that one is possible for the reason in the increase, but it's definitely not the most likely because there's a lot of caveats that we've just explained there. Same with domestic unemployment has risen. If the domestic unemployment rises, yes, we may have a decrease in the level of exports due to less labour being available to work, but if domestic unemployment rises, it's likely that our national income levels will decrease. So can we say for certain that we're going to export more goods and more services, or import, more goods and more services if our national income level is decreased? No, we can't say for certain. So again, that one may possibly result in the deficit being larger, but there's caveats attached to it too. However, if our rate of inflation is rising faster than the rate of inflation of our major trading partners, because they've told us, or they've given us this caveat in here, that this is our relationship with the major trading partners, goods and services are becoming more expensive in our country and they're relatively less expensive in their country. So what we will do for sure is that we're going to be able to export less because they're now more expensive for us to make and therefore to sell. But in other countries, they're relatively less expensive than if we buy them domestically, so we will increase our number of imports from those countries. And we know that that will contribute to the increased deficit on the current account. Okay, a government increases the rate of income tax. What is the effect in the short run on the aggregate demand curve or the aggregate supply curve? Okay, so if a government increases the rate of income tax, very simple. What is that? That is a contractionary fiscal policy, and a contractionary fiscal policy is basically only designed to move AD to the left. Okay, now why does it move AD to the left? If the rate of income tax goes up, people have less money in their pockets. So one of the components of aggregate demand is consumer expenditure, and they are likely to spend less money, which means that the total level of demand in the economy will reduce. Okay, I thought this one was a relatively unusual question, but quite a good question actually. So, diagram shows 3 PPCs for a country labelled 3, 2 and 1. The original PPC for the country is 2. Country experiences a fall in its working population, and then this is followed by a long period of recession. Okay, if an increase in GDP then takes place, what is the increase in production? Okay. So first of all, what would we expect when they have a fall in their working population? We would expect a shift to the left because we're going to have a decrease in the quantity and or the quality of resources, right? So if we start at 2, we'd expect to be somewhere around S. Okay, then we're followed by a long period of recession. So even just by process of common sense, we can see that there is no further shift to go on to, or to shift leftwards, right? So that means that we would have to end up at point or, where we have a recession. So what's going to happen with a recession is that a recession is going to generate large amounts of unemployment. right? And one of the things we know about our PPC with unemployment is that it results in an inefficient allocation of resources, right? And when we have an inefficient allocation of resources, we tend to be at a production point that is inside the curve, not on the curve, because we're using less of the resources that are available in society. Okay, so therefore, if we have an increase in GDP, what is the increase in production? We're left with two options here because we know we're left at OR. We've got OR to U or OR to S. So in order to have OR to U, we'd have to have a shift in our PPC because we're now on line 3, right? But we've only been told that there's an increase in GDP. We haven't been told that there's anything which increases the quantity and quality of resources available. Therefore, the only option that's left is OR to S. And how do we know there's been an increase in GDP? Because we can see that we can move from OR to S with an increase in both consumer and capital goods. Alright, so our total amount of goods or services being provided has increased. Okay, 22. Over which period did disinflation occur? So to get this question, we have to understand what disinflation is. Disinflation is basically where we have inflation. Okay, now this is in simple terms, but the rate of inflation is dropping. Okay, so that's what we're looking for. It's where we know that we have inflation, but where the rate of inflation is going to be coming down. So if we follow this July 2020 to February 2021, so that would be starting from here, right? And going to February 21, well, we can see that starting in October, we'd actually start experiencing deflation. So anytime the number is negative, it's deflation. Anytime the number is positive, it's inflation, but it's disinflation if that rate is continuously dropping. So therefore, we can see that from July 2020, August and September, that is the period of disinflation. Okay, very straightforward. So you'll see with the others, they're either going to have inflation where the rate is going up, or they're going to have deflation included where the rate is negative. Okay, 21. What combination is possible for an economy experiencing zero inflation? Okay, so we've got the average real wages and the average nominal wages. So basically we just have to figure out from left and right here what's possible. So if you've got zero inflation, basically it means that we've got no adjustment for the average real wages, right? So therefore our nominal wages are before we make the adjustment for inflation. So if we start with D, if our nominal wages are unchanged, it's impossible for our real wages to go up, because our nominal wages is the change in salaries or wages that take place before we account for the CPI figure or the inflation figure. So if that doesn't change at all, it's impossible for our real wages to go up. Similarly, if the nominal wages rise, it's therefore impossible for our real wages to go down because we have this zero inflation. So we know that there's no adjustment that's needed, right? Now if that said rising and rising, then that would be possible, but that's not an option that's given to us. So falling and rising therefore also has to be incorrect, but falling and falling can be correct. Okay, so we could have it falling and falling due to no inflation. We could have it rising and rising due to no inflation too, but that wasn't an option that was provided to us. Okay, question 20. What is the size of the gross national income for country X? So one of the things we need to do here is GNI is our GDP plus it's this net factor income that's earned. So we just need to figure out very simply, do we take this away or do we add it? Okay, and it's simple. if it's earned by residents of economy X working in a foreign country, that is going to be added to the GNI of economy X because it's money their residents are earning. Whereas the people who are living in economy X but are non-residents, that money will be taken away, right? So 100 plus 10 is 110, minus 25 is 85 billion. Okay, very straightforward. Question 19. Country X can produce a product at a lower opportunity cost than country Y. Which term best describes this statement? Okay, so it's not absolute advantage. Absolute advantage is not related to the opportunity cost. It's related to the total level of output that can be produced. Okay. It is, however, comparative advantage, which is where a country can produce at a lower opportunity cost than another, so they're going to specialize in that good or that service, and then they're going to come together and trade. Specialization and terms of trade are different. So terms of trade is the index of the export prices relating to the index of the import prices. It's nothing to do with a lower opportunity cost. And specialization is what they will do after they figure out the comparative advantage. Specialization is where they're going to focus on making a good or service that they are particularly good at making. Okay? And they'll use the theory of comparative advantage in order to figure that out. So, what must be the result of a rise for a country of a rise in its export prices relative to its import prices? So just like I talked about before, what we're talking about here is the terms of trade, right? Now, if we have a rise in our export prices relative to our import, that means that we're going to have an improvement in our terms of trade, okay? So just to show you an example, if we say in year 1 that our terms of trade is 100, and in year 2 our terms of trade is 105, what we're saying is that the index of the export prices has risen relative to the index of the import prices. So our exports, or the average prices, are now higher than they are for the imports. We call an improvement when the number gets bigger. So an improvement in the terms of trade is always when the index of the export prices is going up, and a deficit in the terms of trade, or a deterioration in the terms of trade, is when that number is reducing. So the prices of imports are becoming relatively or comparatively more expensive than the price of the exports. Okay, nothing to do with inflation rate, that's calculated through CPI, and it's nothing to do with an appreciation, which is a rise in its exchange rate either. Okay, question 17. Which term relates to a fall in the domestic real value of a currency? Okay, so remember that when we have inflation, that is a fall in the domestic real value of a currency. A depreciation is just a fall. So if I can put this in here, an appreciation is an increase in the value of a currency in comparison to the value of another currency. Okay, a depreciation is a decrease in the value of a currency in comparison to the value of another currency. And deflation is where the price level goes down. That would actually result in the domestic real value of the currency increasing. Okay, because when the price of goods and services go down, if we hold the same amount of money today and tomorrow we have deflation, we can now buy more goods and more services with that same amount of money. Whereas with inflation, price of goods and services go up, so the same amount of money today results in the domestic real value of the currency decreasing, because the same amount of money will buy us less goods and less services tomorrow due to the increase in the prices. Okay, 16 is also a relatively straightforward question, okay? We won't spend too long on this one either. So the government imposes a specific indirect tax of $1 on each unit of a good sold. How does the imposition of the tax shift the demand or supply curve? So first of all, we know that an indirect tax does not shift the demand curve. Okay? It does shift the supply curve. And what does it do? It shifts the supply curve to the left. So once we match it up here, we can see what happens. It will shift vertically upwards by $1 because an indirect tax will make the good more expensive. So shifting downwards would be if we had a shift to the right, if we had a decrease in our cost of production, for example. But that doesn't happen with an indirect tax. It makes the good more expensive, so price goes up and we shift vertically upwards. Okay, 15. Quite an unusual question, but again, not a very difficult one. So what is necessary for an action to be classed as a transfer payment? So remember that a transfer payment is something like a pension or an unemployment benefit that is paid. Okay, now in these cases, does it have to include a cash payment? No. Does it have to include a banking transaction? No. Does it have to originate from government activity? No. In fact, probably won't originate from government activity, but it must relate to a non-productive activity. Now, what does that mean? That basically means that the person who is receiving it, okay, they haven't been productive in order to receive it. Okay, so the person who is receiving the transfer payment, okay, hasn't been productive in the process of earning that income. Okay, so what do I mean by that? Well, what I mean is, let's take a unemployment benefit, for example. The unemployment benefit will be paid out of the tax that the government collects from the people who are working. So the person who's unemployed, they're definitely involved in a non-productive activity. They're receiving income, essentially, that is being transferred from people who are working and paying their taxes to people who are doing nothing while they don't have a job. So they get to receive that income despite not being involved in the process of earning that income. Okay, question 14. What is most likely to be regressive? So remember, regressive means that the higher people on lower incomes are going to be paying higher percentages of tax than the people who are on higher incomes. Okay, so it's the opposite of a progressive tax. Now, which out of these is likely to be the most regressive? Corporate profit taxes, state pension benefits, or unemployment benefits. So first of all, unemployment benefits and state pension benefits, they're transfer payments. We've just literally discussed that. They're not likely to be regressive at all. In fact, they're not taxes. They're just benefits that are received. So we're left with corporate profit taxes and specific taxes on cigarettes. Now, the one that is most likely to be regressive is a specific tax, because a specific tax will be placed on the product, and that will be set. So take the person who is earning, let's say a packet of cigarettes with a specific tax is now $10, okay? And we've got two people. We've got Mr. Sean, who's very poor and is only earning $100. And then we've got Derek, who has run his own business and he's earning $1,000. Okay, and they both smoke. So when we have the specific tax and it's 10%, that is now representing a larger percentage of my income than it is representing for Derek. So it's 10% of my income to buy the cigarettes, but it's only 1% of Derek's income. So therefore Derek is the high earner. The more he earns, the smaller percentage he pays. The less I earn, the higher percentage I pay, because the specific tax doesn't change based on your income, right? Okay, now this is it's a bit of a silly question, if I'm being honest with you. What is the most likely cause of the continuous increase in prices of famous paintings by now dead artists? We've actually covered this one off in class before, so I'm not going to go through a detailed explanation of it. If you forgot what that explanation from class was, then just send me a message and I'll find that explanation that was previously provided. But basically, it's the popular view that famous paintings by artists are an appreciating asset. So it's the view that when an artist dies, there's a perception or a preference amongst people that the stuff the artist has made previously will continue to rise in value. Okay, that's the reason why there's continuous increase in their prices. Question 12. Equation for quantity demanded QD for a product is 400 minus 20p, where p is the price in dollars. Quantity supplied is QS equals 100 plus 40p. What change will occur if price rises from $5 to $6? Okay. The first thing we need to do is we need to find the quantity demanded and quantity supplied at $5. Okay, because we're asked about the change, so we need to know what the values of them are before the change. So at $5, our QD is going to equal 400 minus 20 multiplied by 5. So our QD will equal 400 minus 100. QD will therefore be 300. QS will equal, following the formula here, 100 plus 40 into 5. So QS will equal 100 plus 200. QS will equal 300. So we can see that prior to the change in the price, quantity demanded and quantity supplied are equal, which we know is the definition of being in a market equilibrium. Alright, so we know that straight away there's no shortage to surplus and there's no surplus to shortage. We start at a point of being in equilibrium. So all we need to do then is we need to calculate that change when we have a $6 change in price. Okay, so QD in this case is going to equal 400 minus 20 into 6, which would be 120. So our QD, or quantity demanded, will be 280. Quantity supplied is going to equal 100 plus 40 multiplied by 6, which is 240. So our quantity supplied is going to be 340. So very simple, right? Boy, sorry about that. What can we see? We can see that the quantity supplied is now exceeding the quantity demanded, which we know represents a surplus. Remember that a shortage is where we have higher demand than supply, and a surplus is where we have higher supply than demand. Okay, so B will be our correct answer there. Okay, in the long run, the stock of houses for sale S1 is fixed. A government decides to allow some agricultural land to be used for building houses and subsidizes low-income buyers of the new houses. Which diagram shows the long-run situation? Okay. First of all, straight away, we know that it's not going to be A and B. Okay? Because the supply was only fixed in the short run, and in the long run they're going to allow some agricultural land to be used for building houses, so our supply is not going to be perfectly inelastic like it is in A and B here anymore, especially because they're saying the diagram shows us the long run situation. Now the second thing is that we're told they subsidise low-income buyers of the new houses. So what is that going to do? That's going to allow low-income buyers to be able to purchase the houses now, as it's going to provide them financial support. So we know that the demand curve should be shifting to the right. So what we can see here is two graphs that look very similar, except for D, this one would be correct because it would be showing us the subsidy that would be received by the low income earners. Remember, our curve here is representing the price and the quantity of houses, and the demand for those houses would be increased through a subsidy for low income buyers. Okay, remember, it's not increasing the supply, because this would be the supply of houses. The subsidy is not given on the supply of houses, it's given to the consumers who are actually purchasing the houses. Hence the reason why demand would shift here and not supply, which is what we would have gone through before, right? So we would be preconditioned to thinking that a subsidy would affect the supply, but not in this case because it is given to the consumers, not to the producers. Question 10. In the diagram, D and S represent the demand for and the supply of smartphones. Many components used in the production of smartphones are imported. The initial equilibrium is at point X. The exchange rate has depreciated at the same time as the price of a complementary good has decreased. Okay, so first of all, if the exchange rate depreciates, and we're looking at smartphones which are relying on components to be imported, we know that what a depreciation does is that it makes our total exports, total exports up and total imports down. It reduces the price of the exports and it increases the price of the imports. So if our total imports go down, we're relying on these imports as these components to make the smartphones. That is going to shift the supply curve to the left, right? So we're going to be left at this point here. And then if we're told that if the price of a complement good decreases, well then that is going to make more people come in to buy the complementary good, and at the same time as they're buying the complementary good, they're going to want to buy our product also, which means that our demand curve should shift to the right. So we'll be left at point B. Okay, in 2010, poor harvests reduced fruit crops and furniture producers gave big discounts on furniture products. How might these changes have affected the position of the supply curve for the products? Okay, so first thing we need to do, poor harvests reduced fruit crops. What's that going to do? We know that weather conditions or external factors is something that can shift the supply. That's going to shift the supply to the left because it's going to reduce the supply of fruit that is available. Okay, and now we're left with either shift to the left for furniture producers or no change. So all we're told is that furniture producers give big discounts on furniture products. So basically what they're telling us here is that the price is changing for the furniture products, right? Now what we know is that price will cause either a change in the price of the product itself, will cause an extension or a contraction in either supply or demand. It's not going to be a reason for a shift though, right? So because the question is asking us the position of the supply curve, we would have to choose as the most sensible option, no change. Because it would definitely, giving big discounts would definitely not shift the supply curve to the left, that's for sure. Question 8. After a 10% decrease in a consumer's income, the consumer's demand for a good rises from 100 to 105, what is the value of the consumer's income elasticity of demand for the good? So the first thing is the formula that we need, which is the percentage change in quantity demanded over the percentage change in income. Okay. Now we're told that there's a 10% decrease in income and the demand 100 to 105. So 5 over 100 as an increase. What does that represent? That represents a 5% increase, right? So very simple, 5% plus over negative 10% equals minus 0.5. Okay, very straightforward. As is question 7. So another consumer surplus question. So a family is willing to pay a maximum of 600, 500 and 400 for air tickets for the mother, father and daughter to attend a wedding in another city. Airline announces a promotional airfare of $4.50 per ticket. What will be the consumer surplus gained by the family? So we know that that's going to be the gain that they have on 3 tickets, right? Because that's the number they're purchasing if they use the promotional offer. So the first thing we need to do is we need to find out what they are willing to pay, right? Because we know that consumer surplus is the difference between the equilibrium price in the market and the amount that they're willing and able to pay, which would be the top of the demand curve. So we can see here that they're willing to pay $1,500 because their willingness and ability to pay would be the 600, the 500 and the 400 for the 3 tickets. Now what they're actually going to have to pay will be the price, which is going to be 450 multiplied by 3. So the actual amount they're going to pay will be 1,350. And the consumer surplus is going to be the difference between the market price and the price they're willing and able to pay, i.e. the top of the demand curve, 1,500 minus 1,350, and we're left with a consumer surplus for the family of 150, which is B. Okay, question 6. Some goods are overconsumed in a market economy. What is likely to be the cause of this? Okay, it has nothing to do with consumer and producer surplus. It has nothing to do with undervaluing the benefits of consuming a good. If that was the case, they would be underconsumed, not overconsumed. If they didn't understand the full benefits, they wouldn't be consuming enough of that good, which would make them underconsumed. Excess supply in the markets, again, has nothing to do with it. You think about excess supply, it means that the supply level is higher than the demand. So how can they be overconsumed? But if there's imperfect information in the market, that would be the cause of the overconsumption, which is relating to demerit goods. Question 5. Rice and pasta are both basic foods in a country. How would a health scare concerning rice affect the market for pasta? Okay, so first thing is, if we have a health scare affecting rice, that's going to affect the consumer's attitudes, tastes and preferences towards that product. So for rice, I'm just going to put or. That is going to mean that the demand curve for rice is going to shift to the left. So there's going to be less people willing and able to buy rice as they're going to be concerned about their health, right? Now, because they're both basic foods in a country, that means that they're going to be substitutes for one another, right? So how's it going to affect the market for pasta? So if rice is a substitute and the demand for rice goes to the left, that means that less people will buy rice and they will switch to buying more of pasta. So the demand for pasta is going to move to the right And if we show that on a demand and a supply diagram, what does that create? You can see here that that creates an extension in supply. Okay, question 4, quite an odd one. East European nations have changed from plan to market economies. Which policy was least likely to have been adopted? So least likely to have been put in place, right? So, allowing prices to fluctuate. That is very likely to happen. Whoa. Okay, because the price mechanism is going to take over control, and that will allow prices to fluctuate. The same thing with changes happening in the money supply. It's going to be relating to demand and supply, right? So it's not now no longer going to be under government control. And the same with privatizing essential industries. So privatization is something that happens when we move from planned to market economy, as the private sector takes over the control. However, the least likely to happen is keeping established economic organizations. Okay, so price mechanism will basically affect the other three, which means that we're only really left with one sensible option, which would be B. Okay, I'm getting tired now. A new section of road is provided toll-free by the government. What best describes this good? So remember, the key thing about this is it's generally between public and private. But in order for it to be public, we need to be able to say with absolute certainty that that good is non-excludable and it's non-rivalrous. Okay? Now, if you think about the nature of a toll-free road, you might be able to say, okay, well, maybe it will meet the non-excludable part, but it is definitely not going to be non-rivalrous, right? Because a new section of road is going to take up a limited amount of space. So it's not going to be a demerit good, because it's not going to generate any external costs, at least not from what they've told us anyway. It's not going to be a free good because there is factors of production used in its production. And because we cannot say conclusively that it will meet both the characteristics of a public good, i.e. being non-excludable and being non-rivalrous, we would have to deem it to be a private good and not a public good. Okay, remember I told you guys before, generally in the exam, they'll give the same kind of public goods. They'll give national defence, street lighting, or lighthouse. Okay, they don't really go for any different types of public goods other than that. Okay, last two. What is considered the essential requirement for all entrepreneurs? Again, very simple. It's in the definition of an entrepreneur, that's taking risks. Managing staff is an essential requirement for a manager. Buying stock and attracting consumers, they're not the essential requirements. The essential requirement for an entrepreneur is that they are willing to take high risks in order to receive high rewards. Okay? They have to be willing to risk their financial security, that could be, in order to reap the high rewards that they can get from owning and running the business. It's in the definition of an entrepreneur. And finally, 1, PPC is the production possibility curve. It's about opportunity costs. So again, we only studied 2 types of PPC curves. There are more, but they're not studied in AS Cambridge Economics. There's 2 types. There's one which is curved, which shows an increasing opportunity cost. So at different points along this curve, the opportunity cost of giving up one good or the other good may increase. Or there is a straight line PPC, which shows constant opportunity cost. So for A would be shown if the PPC was straight line. B and C, decreasing opportunity costs, we don't study them in AS Economics. You'll never get a question where the answer is opportunity costs decreasing. Okay, thanks for listening.